All right, everybody, welcome once again. Thank you for being here on the first Monday in November 2025. We often do a bidders conference when we have an RFP out, and we thought it'd be particularly helpful given that this is a little bit different than our normal project type to have everybody get together and do an information session. We are recording, so we will post the recording, Lauren. Uh,
Uh, sorry, I was trying to find the unmute button. I think we will see what the content of the discussion is, and then we will decide whether or not we will post it or whether or not we'll send it out as requested.
okay, all right, thank you. Okay, next slide. All right, so our agenda is to talk about the background for this RFP, then to walk through the actual transitional housing, interim housing project, the requirements for the RFP and for the transitional housing type project, and then go through any questions. This is going to be more time spent than our typical bidders conference on question and answers, less time on the actual application process. And it's a space for applicants who are working to form a project concept to bounce ideas off our team or that type of thing. And of course, answer any other questions that you may have. So the background, each year, CT BOSS, our Balance of State Continuum of Care, competes with other COCs, as many of you know, for U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, funding to end homelessness. So that is not different from other years. HUD has signaled significant changes, different than other years, for the 2025 competition. So as you all know, there are many, many unknowns. The timeline is unknown. The details of what's going to be required this year, if there is a NOVO, is unknown. But we have gotten recent information from HUD, and there, of course, are many rumors, right? Other recent federal NOFOs, or notice of funding opportunities, have had a timeline of 2 weeks or less. So just again, we don't know what this timeline will be. Preliminary information suggests that high scoring continuums of care are likely to gain significant new project funds because of the way they're talking about structuring this NOFO. And we are doing our very best to be prepared for what's coming down the road with the limited information that we do have, right? So next slide.
So just before you move on, one thing I just want to say for sure that we do know, right, is that HUD has said that they want transitional housing applications, right? It was called out in their communication as, something that will be a focus in the upcoming competition.
So a transitional housing interim housing request for proposals. What is this type of project? We're looking for projects for individuals or families or both who are experiencing homelessness, and that can be category 1 homelessness, which is literal homelessness, category 2, which is imminent or within 14 days of being homeless, or category 4, which is people who are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, sex trafficking, stalking, that type of thing. The priority target populations that we're looking for is people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, people who are age 62 and older, or those who require medical respite services. And this type of housing provides safe accommodations and intensive services. to assist people stabilize and transition into permanent housing. And it can be, the length of time can be short to medium term, no longer than 24 months. We've extended the deadline to next Friday, the 14th of November, instead of this Friday. And there's a link on this slide to the RFP details and to the budget template as well. Feel free to ask any questions along the way, but there will be plenty of time for questions at the end. Next slide. Once again, the timing for this NOFO is unclear, whether it's going to be this year or next year. So depending on what happens, what comes out from HUD, we may do a couple of different things. We may reopen the RFP on a rolling basis after the deadline, or we may enable applicants to resubmit proposals for consideration next year in 2026. We advise everybody to be as prepared as possible for any eventuality that comes up, to apply, submit your applications by the 14th. Next slide. So with all of our opportunities, applicants who have never applied before are encouraged to apply, and we do provide technical assistance. Should the application go to HUD, we provide technical assistance for applications that go to HUD, and there's still time for questions. If you do have questions, we don't guarantee that, depending on what type of question, how much research we have to do. The FAQ deadline has already passed, so it's not guaranteed we will get to it, but we will do our best to get to your questions should you have them moving forward. And there is a frequently asked questions document that we did post to our website last week. So just so you all know, this is the tip for our NOFOs. We have received very high scores and received very little in Tier 2 in new projects, or we've received very high scores and received all of our Tier 2 projects. So it's just one more of the unknowns about this competition, about how much funding will be available for new projects and how many new projects we would actually get based on our score. This past competition, we still don't know our score. We received less than half of our amount for new projects. So this is our usual process for submitting new projects. The different thing about this one than recent years is that the first step, submitting the RFP, submitting the application, is not in Zension. But firstly, the organization submits the application to CT Boss, and we do that through the CT Boss Gmail. The scoring committee meets and scores the applications. HUD releases the NOFO. The applicants that are selected are notified. Then the project is, the grantee is required to submit an application in eSnaps. And then the last step, of course, is HUD announcing the awards. And the scoring factors are similar to previous years. There's 30 points for organizational experience and capacity. Program and service expectations receive 40 points. Performance and outcomes receive 10 points. Budget and budget narratives, 10 points. And then the implementation timeline is worth 10 points. There will be, so the scoring is similar to last year. There will be additional threshold items. For instance, if the project is not specified in the instructions, it's not an allowable project type. If all parts of the application are not complete, or if the match amount isn't correct, that's a threshold item. We did talk about there was a question in the FAQ about supportive services. So the dollar limit that we set a dollar limit in the past for PSH and for rapid rehousing, and it was $9,500, Lauren. Yes. Um, so we didn't set a limit for this. If your project were to go above that amount, we would be looking for additional justification for why you're asking for more funding, but it's not a threshold item. I think I'm going to hand it over to Lauren.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you all. So I'm just going to go through now and talk through the basics of what the HUD requirements are for the transitional housing component type. So all of these applications would be submitted to HUD as transitional housing. And what we did is based upon the questions that got submitted and are in the FAQ, we tried to anticipate what questions folks might have. But like Shannon said, you don't have to wait until we get to the end. At any time, if you have questions that we're not addressing, just chime in and we will get all your questions answered. So the other thing to know here is that, this is often the case when we release an RFP. We don't have a NOFO yet. And so it may be that there are additional requirements beyond those that are established in the COC program interim rule and existing HUD guidance that they may establish specific for this NOFO. So we will, plow forward as we always do. And when we get more information from HUD, we will adjust accordingly. And for those folks who have already submitted applications and have been selected by the scoring committee to put forward an application to HUD, we will work with the applicants to make any adjustments needed once we do see the NOFO. So stay tuned for additional information coming from HUD. So, wanted to start by just talking about what the eligible budget line items are. So the first thing, how do you pay for the housing related costs? So how you can do that in a transitional housing program really depends upon whether or not you as the applicant or a subrecipient with whom you are partnering owns the housing. So where there are units that are owned by one or more agencies that's part of the partnership of an application, you can use the rental assistance budget line item. So you can use short or medium term rental assistance. So as Shannon said, no more than 24 months. And you can do that either in project-based rental assistance or as sponsor-based rental assistance. And then you could also use the operating budget line item, but you cannot do both, right? So you cannot combine rental assistance with operating. I think Kathy just put her hand up.
Is master leasing counts under leasing or operating?
Yeah, so
If you have a master lease.
so master leasing is its own budget line item. So I'll do that one now, Kathy. So thanks for the question. So the other way is that if you do not own the building, then you can do master leasing. You cannot use the budget line item, the leasing budget line item for units that your agency owns. But if you don't own the units, then you can master lease them. And we'll talk a little bit in a minute about what that leasing arrangement needs to look like. And if you are using the leasing budget line item, you can also have an operating budget line item. So that's a little bit of an advantage for you doing leasing instead of rental assistance, is that in addition to the FMR amount, you also can get additional, an additional budget to cover some other operating costs. The other thing that you could do if you do not own the units is that you could use the tenant-based rental assistance budget line item. But then again, because that's rental assistance, you cannot combine operating and rental assistance in the same grant. So you're just going to be limited. Your budget will just be limited to that FMR amount. So As is always the case for these projects, you can also apply for supportive services. You can also apply for up to 10% for project administration. You can apply for an HMIS budget line item, and you can apply for a VAWA budget line item. And then, of course, in addition, you can also do whatever your indirect is. If you claim indirect, either the now 15% de minimis indirect rate, or if your agency has a negotiated indirect rate or a NICRA, you can claim indirect at whatever that NICRA level is that is in your agency's approved NICRA. So in addition, this only applies for projects that are located, meaning like the housing itself is going to be located in Litchfield County. Litchfield County has been determined by HUD to be a rural county, and therefore in previous NOFOs, we'll see in this NOFO, but has been eligible for a rural budget line item, which would enable you to pay for short-term emergency lodging, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, as well as if you're finding that there aren't enough housing units in your area in Litchfield County that meet the HUD housing quality HQS standard, you can also pay for some housing unit repairs, as well as some staff training. But again, those are only if the housing itself is located in Litchfield County. So HUD does require for all transitional housing that the participants have either a lease, a sublease, or an occupancy agreement. Typically in transitional housing, we see, either the agency owns the units and they're using an operating budget line item, or the units are master leased, and there's an occupancy agreement. Although again, the rental assistance line item here is an eligible line item. So HUD requires that the occupancy agreement or lease or sublease has to have an initial term of at least 1 month, right? And it's got to be automatically renewable upon expiration, unless one party has notified the other party that they are not going to renew the agreement. And then again, because the maximum length of stay in transitional housing is 24 months, it's got a maximum term of, the agreement can have a maximum term of 24 months. So this graphic here comes from HUD, and it is a depiction of the leasing arrangement that is required if you're going to use the rental assistance budget line item, right? So you, as the recipient of the funds or the subrecipient, would enter into a contract. We usually call that a housing assistance payment contract or a HAP contract with the landlord, and that contract basically delineates the terms for the subsidy, right? It says, initially what the subsidy is going to pay versus what the program participant's going to pay, and that can change as the participant's income changes, and things like they've got to give you access in order to do HQS inspections, and the terms under which you're going to discontinue the subsidy. So that's called the HAP contract. So you enter into a HAP contract with the landlord, and then the lease is between the landlord and the program participant. So your agency is not a party to the lease. So HUD requires a different leasing arrangement when you're using the leasing budget line item. So if you're using leasing, your arrangement is going to look like this. So this is, Kathy just referred to it as master leasing. So you basically master lease the units from the person that owns those units, and then you sublease those units or enter into an occupancy agreement with the folks, the participants who are actually going to be living in the unit. So you are not permitted to use this arrangement if you are using the leasing budget line item. So you've got to master lease the units if you're using the leasing budget line item. All right. So, a little bit about using motels. So, obviously, this is quite attractive as a way of, getting folks who might otherwise be unsheltered into, an immediate, safe, housed situation. You can use hotels and motels as part of your transitional housing strategy, but all of the requirements that we just went through still apply, right? So you still have to have a lease or an occupancy agreement that meets all of the requirements that we just discussed. And then you've also got to make sure that you're paying for those hotels and or motels using an allowable method, right? So the only place in the state of Connecticut where HUD's going to allow you to rent hotel rooms on a night by night basis is Litchfield County. So that is only an eligible expense if the project is located, meaning the units are located in Litchfield County. So mostly probably what you're going to do if you want to use a hotel motel is you're going to have to master lease either a portion of hotel motel space, so master lease 4 units in a hotel, for example, or master lease an entire hotel structure. Maybe there's a hotel in your community that is underutilized, and you can get the owner to agree to master lease the entire structure to you. So you've got to remember that even for a hotel or motel, right, because you're probably going to be using the leasing budget line item, you are going to have to determine rent reasonableness, right? Meaning that the unit is not more than, you're renting that unit for not more than comparable units in the community in terms of size and location and amenities. You also cannot exceed FMR, right? So depending upon the configuration of the room, right? Sometimes there are motel rooms that are actually fully self-contained units. They have a private kitchen and a private bathroom. And then in which case, like any other unit, it would be based upon the FMR for the bedroom size. So if it's a 1 bedroom unit, then it's the 1 bedroom FMR. Sometimes, particularly in more affordable hotels and motels, there might be a private bathroom, but there is not a private kitchen in the unit. In that case, you're going to have to use the SRO FMR. So single room occupancy, fair market rent. And it's going to be lower than, the standard 1 bedroom FMR. So definitely some challenges here. Amanda raised her hand.
Thanks. The SRO FMR is 75% of, and I can't remember how you get this SRO FMR.
I would have to look that up, Amanda. I think
Okay.
that the SRO FMR is listed
I
on
think
the,
it's listed
Is
too.
yeah.
it? I never see it when I see efficiency, but I never see the SRO one.
I'll
I
look.
yeah, we'll look into
Okay.
that. We'll look
Thanks.
into that. And actually, I'm glad you said that, Amanda, because also if the unit is an efficiency unit, right, meaning that it doesn't have a separate kitchen space, right, it's all just one room and there's like a little kitchenette in the room, then you're going to use the efficiency FMR and not the 1 bedroom FMR. So, all right.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Yeah, so an efficiency, right? A 1 bedroom means that it's a separate bedroom, right, with a separate entrance, right? An efficiency is a unit that is all one space, you know what I mean? It's all one room, and within the room, there's obviously a private bathroom, but the kitchen, right, is basically located in the same space as the living sleeping space, right? So
Right.
a lot of
What
cases.
needs to be included in that kitchen? A fridge, a
It has to
stove.
meet HQS, so it's the
Okay.
same
All right,
as
perfect.
HQS standards. Yeah. So in a lot of hotels and motels, if they have a kitchen, it's going to be an efficiency. It's not going to be a 1 bedroom, right? So the bedroom is not going to be its own separate room. It's all going to be one space, and the kitchen is like a little area within that space. All right, so rent contribution, and then we will see what questions people have that we didn't get to. So per HUD requirements, if you are using the rental assistance budget line item, you must collect rent from your participants. And it basically, we've linked here to the HUD guidance on how rent has to be calculated. It will look very familiar to those of you who operate permanent supportive housing. It's the same standards, right? So it's 30% of adjusted income with the standard income adjustments, the most common one being the disability adjustment. When you are not using rental assistance, so you're using maybe the operating budget line item or you're using the leasing budget line item, then HUD does not require participants to contribute rent. If you are charging rent, regardless of what budget line item you are using, or an occupancy fee, sometimes it's called in transitional housing instead of rent, then that money that you're collecting is considered program income by HUD. So what that means is that you have to treat that program income the same way that you do the COC funding that's coming in, right? You can only expend that program income on COC eligible expenses, and you must expend that program income on eligible expenses during the operating year in which you received it. So you can't take that money and do whatever you want with it whenever you want with it. You can only spend it on eligible COC expenses, and it must be expended within the operating year it was received. Another thing about rent contribution is that if you are opting to collect rent from people, right? And it's not a rental assistance program, right? You're using the leasing and or the operating budget line item to fund the housing, then you can collect the rent and hold it for people, right? You can put it into like an interest-bearing account and give it back to them when they exit. That is allowable and something people might want to consider. Shannon, I think we had a couple questions that came in post posting of the fact that we were going to cover now. Do you want to go through what those are? You there?
I was muted. Sorry, I was talking.
Okay.
We had a question about allowable budget amounts. So there are no set allowable budget amounts. Lauren just talked about like fair market rent, of course, if you're doing rent assistance or leasing, and we talked about for supportive services, the standard that has been set for PSH and Rapid was $9,500 per household per year. So if you're going to go over that amount, we would be looking for, the scoring committee would be looking for a justification and explanation for why that is, but there's no set allowable budget amount. There's another,
Just
go
to
ahead.
move on to the next one. So HUD always, right, for all federal contracts, you've got to, be able to, you can't charge things that are not reasonable, right? So if, HUD were to come in and determine that what you are paying is not what a prudent person would pay in similar circumstances, then they could find that it's an ineligible expense because it's not reasonable. It's not very well defined what that means other than what I just said. Reasonable means it's what a prudent person would pay in similar circumstances.
Okay. Another question was, what is the total number of participants to be served? So that's also not something that is specified in the RFP. So propose the amount that you want to serve. There's a question whether we would need to focus on, like, what number of cans is okay to focus on, and that's not stipulated in the RFP. So propose your project where it makes sense for you to serve the population that needs to be served. And is it possible to work in more than one can? If yeah, if the project makes sense to you, if you have staff or will have staff in a certain area, it's okay to do work in more than one CAN region. Um, that was all the questions from those people.
So, and we're happy to take questions, and we're also happy. We know that some people may still be at the early stages of trying to come up with a project concept here. We're also happy to talk through, whatever ideas you guys have that where you think we could be helpful. Kathy.
Yeah, as we're thinking about this, I should probably know this. We have a snowfall contract for outreach, which would obviously be very relevant here. Is there any way to think about what might be happening with that over the next, year or two? Or you don't know, or
So we suspect, I mean, one of the very few pieces of information that we have from HUD about what they are going to put in this NOFO does indicate that street outreach is something that they are interested in continuing to fund. So I would suspect, based upon that, and let me know if I'm not getting to your question, Kathy, that we would anticipate that the SNOFO street outreach projects will be eligible for renewal and will not be subject to the same kind of cap that we are seeing proposed for permanent housing.
and
And then
can you use that as part of your match or not?
no, you can't use COC
Yo,
funds.
okay,
Yeah, you can't see
okay.
COC funds for match. You can also, though, as is always the case for a COC project, one of the eligible line items in the supportive services budget is outreach, right? So you could also propose to enhance outreach that's happening, through as a supportive service through one of these projects.
And if we do want to submit more questions, where do we do that?
Submit them to the CT Boss email address, and
The CT boss. Okay.
someone on our team will answer them as quickly as we can. And we'll do our best also to update the FAQ as we answer them so that everybody has access to the same information. So you might want to check back on the FAQ. We'll announce when we update the FAQ and repost a new one. Amanda?
Sorry if this was in the FAQ. I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing, but the 25% match applies to all line items except leasing, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Kathy?
I've got a couple of questions. One is, are there any specific related party requirements or related party rules relative to determining ownership of the property where that you'll be leasing? Like a lot of us have separate related entities that own real estate, and
Okay.
so I just wanted to be sure there weren't any complicating factors with that.
Yeah. So you can't, so when I said you can't own the property, you nor your separate, but interrelated corporately, like if you have a partner that owns the property, okay. But if you've got another entity that you are, I'd have to look up the exact HUD language. It's not coming to me right now. But like if you have a
Subsidiary, yeah.
subsidiary organization owns the property, it's also off the table. You can't lease from yourself, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, let's see, a couple of other things. Your original announcement about this made reference to integrating with the street outreach standards. But is that, but I didn't see that reference much in the more current information. Is that just so that you know that what street outreach is doing and you're coordinating with them? Or is there something more specific related to street outreach that we should be incorporating in these applications?
No, I mean, I think if you're doing street outreach as part of your application, then you would need to comply with the street outreach standards, right? But
Oh,
if you're not doing street outreach as part of this application, then those standards aren't necessarily gonna apply to you. Someone else on our team that worked more on this RFP than I did wanna have anything else to add to that?
Kathy, say again your question related to the street outreach standards.
Well, there was reference to them in the early announcements around this project, but I hadn't
Oh, I
seen
know what you're
reference to them more recently. So and at first when I saw the reference to them, I'm going, wait a minute, but transitional is different from street outreach.
I,
I
I
wasn't
know what
quite
you're
sure
talking
I understood what that was initially. And then so I just want to be sure that I'm clear about
about.
what I'm supposed to understand about those
Yeah,
standards.
so I know what you're referring to now. So when we did an email back before we released this RFP, and at the time that we did that email, we thought that the concept here was going to be stabilization beds for
Okay.
people who are getting street outreach services. And then we got more information. I won't bore you with all the details, but we got more information that led us to believe that the amount of new project money potentially at play here is enormous. And so we wanted to broaden the kinds of projects that were going to be eligible. So those street outreach standards, unless, as I said, you are proposing to do stabilization beds and really work closely in partnership with a street outreach project, in which case they're going to be super relevant. But otherwise, they're probably not going to be.
Or you might want to think about them also if you really say you're targeting all unsheltered people, that collaboration with the street outreach is something you might want to talk about, more comprehensively. Yeah.
And my last question, I think, is are there any service delivery models that you're looking for from us? I'm thinking way back when DOH did their rebids, they were making reference to CTI and some other things like that in terms of service delivery models. Is there anything in terms, what you're expecting to see in this NOFO or and our project design?
There's nothing specific, but I do think that, for any kind of transitional project, CTI certainly is a great model. It's all the usual best practices. So I think CTI would be one. I think motivational interviewing would be one, right? Like, so the more robust your application is and incorporating those kinds of evidence-based practices, the better it will likely do with the scoring committee, but they're not requirements of the RFP.
Okay, thanks.
Happy Zoll.
could you just maybe explain a bit more about how leasing and operating go together? For example, if we were to master lease a property and then we wanted to have a live-in property manager, so to speak, could that property manager be part of operating? Or how do those two fit together? Or are they either or?
No, you can definitely do leasing and operating. And you could, so I'm just calling up bear with me one second while I pull up the eligible expenses on the operating budget line item, which helps me to think through your question. So, for example, if you've master leased a unit and the terms of your lease say that your organization, rather than the landlord, is responsible for maintenance and repair of the housing, right? Then you can bill maintenance and repair on the operating budget line item in addition, right, to what the leasing expenses are. So like if you had an on-site property manager and that person was responsible for maintenance and repair, right, then their salary could be billable to the operating budget line item. Another eligible cost on the operating line is building security, right? So again, if you had an on-site property manager and part of that person's responsibility was providing some security for the building, that would be billable on the operating budget line item. The other things, and again, this is really helpful, I think, because it's something people really struggle to fund in rental assistance. Furniture is eligible on the operating budget line item, whereas it is not on the rental assistance budget line item. And then again, depending upon the terms of the lease, so if the lease says that you, as the lessee, are responsible for electricity, gas, and water, right, then that's an eligible operating expense. If the lease says the landlord's responsible for those things, then it's not an eligible operating expense.
So the amount of the leasing is capped by the FMR, and the operating would be on top of that, or are they okay,
Operating's on top. And the thing to
Yeah.
remember
great.
is that when you budget for a leasing project, it works the same as when you budget for, there are two kinds of leasing budget line items. There's leasing units, right? And the budget for leasing units works just like what you're used to for the budget for rental assistance. So if you have 10 units and the FMR is 1,000, 10 times 1,000, right? That's what you're going to get in your budget. But also, just like rental assistance, you still have to do a rent reasonableness determination, right? So what you actually spend on each unit has to be both below FMR for a leasing project and below whatever you determine to be the reasonable rent. But that doesn't include, right? So you can, in addition to that amount, you can also bill for operating. Amanda?
Is there any way you could request less than the FMR for leasing? Like, because didn't they used to have two different ways of calculating it, either FMR or actuals?
I don't think in a project application you can ever request. Shannon, jump in here if you think I'm wrong about this. I think in a project application you have to request FMR. I don't think there's a way in the project application to request less than FMR.
I don't think in a new project application you can. I'll try to pull one up quickly,
Yeah, I think
but
you
yeah.
have to request FMR. I think later on down the road, if you want to move to actuals, you could, although I think everyone that we've had that has done it has regretted it. So
Yeah, it has.
we wouldn't
Yeah.
suggest it without really thinking it through. But the other kind of leasing budget line item that exists is a lease structure. So in a leased structure, it's not based on FMR. So if you're renting an entire structure, you just say what the amount is that you're going to rent it at.
And I mean, in theory, even if you get, there's still the 10% wiggle room, right? So if you're underspent on leasing,
Yeah.
you can move it over to operation. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But remember, you're going to have to pay security deposits, right? And the security deposits come out of the leasing budget line item the same way they do for rental assistance.
When you
And
say you're gonna have to,
well, you're probably going to need to in order to get units, unless you've got another way of getting units. Not that HUD's going to make you, but like,
okay, I was just making
in
sure.
order
Okay.
to access units, usually landlords want a security deposit. But if you have another way that you're getting units, then no, you don't have to.
I'm looking at an application in ESAPS for a new project, and the line is just FMR area and then the amount for that, and there's not an actual column.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think the security deposits thing is tricky, right? Because in permanent housing, people, often have income, right? And so you're getting some program income through participant rent. If you're not charging rent or people have no income, then there's not going to be a lot of wiggle room in your budget to pay for security deposits. What else?
Sorry, just to confirm, because I was trying to take notes and got a little confused earlier. If you own the building, you can or cannot use rental assistance.
If you own the building, you can use rental assistance. You cannot use leasing.
Leasing. Perfect. Thanks.
If you own the building, you're probably going to use project-based rental assistance. Other questions?
And that can't be combined with operating, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Rental assistance and operating can never be combined.
Right.
Right, so there's a question in the chat about which year you should use on the budget, FMR 26 or 2025. Shannon, do we know the answer to that?
I say go with 2026, and if it needs to be adjusted when the NOFO comes out, we will adjust it.
Okay, so that was my question, and just overall, the Nova, there's so many unknowns that we don't know. If everything went through and you had a stellar project and you were going to get picked, we really don't know what period you would get funded for at this point
Correct.
until
I
the
mean,
Nova comes out.
if they drop a NOFO in 2025,
Yeah,
right, and the start date for these projects is likely to be very late in 2026, right? Very late in the year, like probably November, December of 2026 is going to be because they're so late now in doing this. If they don't drop a NOFO in 2025, which is still a possibility, it's very likely that what we'll do is we'll offer people who submitted this year the opportunity to say, you know, we want you to consider this application again for 2026, in which case the projects will start probably Q3 or Q4 of calendar year 2027.
so potentially people will, depending on what their projects are, they may be looking for additional funding. I think either way, there's no way that it doesn't sound like there's any way for this to be funded for the next fiscal year.
Well, I mean, I think the next state fiscal year, you're saying
Yeah.
state fiscal
July,
year
yeah,
July 1, 2026. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I think you could have projects. I mean, if the NOFO drops in this year, right, you
yeah.
will be funding projects starting in, you know, sometime in late 2026.
So, okay, so sometime maybe in the next, from July 1 to December, you might get your
Yeah.
funding
So,
at best case.
so
Okay, I
state
just wanted
fiscal
to
year
be clear on
2027.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions people have?
Say that one more time. So if it drops in 2025, it will be
Yeah.
late 26, which would be for fiscal year July 1 to June 30, 27.
Yeah, except for that it's very unlikely at this point that HUD's going to execute new uh project contracts until late 2026. So it would be probably like November, December,
Of
and then it would be for
26.
full of 2026, and then it would be for a full operating year. So they get funded for a full operating year. So it would be from, let's say, December 1, 2026 through November 30th, 2027.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Other questions people have? All right. Well, thank you everybody for your time. As Shannon said, our team will do our absolute best to get to any questions that you think of and submit to the CT Boss email address. The sooner you submit them, the more likely it is we'll be able to get back to you with an answer. And you know, when there's still time remaining, as long as there's still time remaining, we will update the FAQ so everyone has access to the same information. All right.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.